2018, there was like back to back suicides. I mean, it was every month. I think it was like 5 or 6 months in a row, somebody was dying.
There's no one that stays in this industry for an extended period of time and doesn't endure tremendous mental and emotional trauma.
When I took a 5-year hiatus, it happened to me. I was being sexually assaulted. I was being all kinds of shit. People thought it was okay because I did porn.
Morality is a very complicated topic. I would never claim to be a moral saint or an expert on what is good and bad in a society. However, I would simply like to present an argument in a creative and hopefully enlightening way. My argument is centered around something I know many of you are familiar with: pornography, particularly modern renditions. According to a study by Brigham Young University, 93% of boys and 62% of girls see porn for the first time between the ages of 13 and 19, and only 23% of them were seeking it out. Considering I made this entire documentary in incognito mode, it's safe to say that we in America see the idea of porn as taboo. However, the statistics paint a different picture. Porn is viewed by nearly 70% of American men and 40% of American women every year, despite numerous studies on its addictive nature, links to decreased life and relationship satisfaction, history of abuse within the industry, self-image problems, violent tendencies, and even sex-related dysfunctions. Despite that, 51% of Americans studied disagreed that porn had any negative effects, and even claimed positive ones. Let's see if I can change their minds. Today, the internet is for porn more than anything else, with over 12% of all websites containing it. But the porndemic wasn't always a thing. Watching people get abused for pleasure at the click of a button was far from the norm. So let's take a look at what's changed. Now, we could go way back and talk about cave drawings and risque paintings dating all the way back to Rome, and even the first civilizations. I know we are all familiar with the prominence of sex in culture throughout history. We've all seen Game of Thrones. But I want to start where the idea of porn became a little bit more detached. Particularly with the invention of photography in 1826. You see, for much of the 1700s, porn was on the rise in the form of erotica, which was simply written depictions of sex and sexual acts in taboo magazines and books. But through all those years, I suppose there was an itch that paintings and writings just didn't scratch, especially in America. Of course, while this didn't stop the popularity of porn, it was extremely taboo to look at it during this time. And that sentiment continued well into the 1800s. So when the first cameras and the printing press came into the picture, the sale of pornographic pictures was often done under the table. I couldn't find a whole lot of information on this, probably because the underbelly of 1800s society isn't really well documented, but this is what I found. Train stations were a common place to deal pornographic photos during this time. I'd assume this is comparable to what Dare showed you as a drug deal when you were 12, only instead of like meth, it's, well. Soon major cities like New York were stomping grounds for prostitutes and porn dealers, but this wouldn't last long. The late 1800s porn industry was forced deeper underground in the late 1860s, after New York politician Anthony Comstock introduced what was later known as the Comstock Act. Anthony Comstock was a devout Christian and vocal opponent of contraceptives, abortion, and pornography. The act banned birth control advertisements, prostitution, and pornography of all kinds, making all three punishable by jail time. The Comstock Act would be passed in 1873 in his home state of New York, baby. And within the coming years, 23 more states followed suit. This made porn and birth control near impossible to get for the rest of the 19th century. However, by the 1900s, Comstock laws became widely ignored throughout the United States, and the underground porn industry boomed. Because how are you going to stop people from jerking off? That just wasn't happening. This came just in time for the invention of the movie camera, a feature typically attributed to Thomas Edison, but was also helped by these guys. And it first came into the picture around 1890. Of course, once people found out pictures could move, they realized that also applied to erotic pictures. So by 1908, what is typically considered the first professional stag film was created. Stag films were essentially silent movies that were also pornos. The pioneering stag film was a porno called something I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but here it is, and it means At the Golden Shield, and was originally produced in France, but made its way to the States not long after. And when this thing hit the box office, the stag film industry exploded, and the underground porn director community was born. Stag films were typically shown in underground speakeasy and Prohibition-era bars. Viewing was strictly men only, and soon enough, cameras got better, the business got bigger, and the first pioneers in pornographic acting rose to fame starting in 1910. Yup, the first porn stars, ladies and gentlemen. What is interesting about this, however, is that porn stars, both male and female, were seen as the epitome of attractiveness during this time, and it wasn't uncommon for people to want to mimic them, both in and outside of the bedroom. This is where I truly think porn first started to become a little bit detached from reality. Particularly because this is also around the time where underground porn directors began accepting requests. Guess how that turned out? The first film to come out under this requests or hardcore category of pornography was a film called A Free Ride or A Grass Sandwich, which came out in 1915, and it was a 10-minute silent film about a guy who picked up two female hitchhikers, and you could probably guess what happens next. Unsurprisingly enough, since stag films were illegal to begin with, porn directors began to branch out into even more taboo topics by the 1920s, because how do you get more taboo than illegal? For example, in 1920, the first pornographic film to feature homosexuality came out, and it was called La Ménage Moderne du Madame Butterfly. I butchered that, but if you could tell, the French were really into this stuff. At this point, porn directors realized that they could get away with a lot more. And so they did. For the next 30 years, the requests kept coming, and the stag film industry kept evolving at the same rate modern movies were. But if you were at war dealing with the angry mustache model between 1939 and 1945, you had to settle for a little thing called pinups, which were really just pictures of attractive women that they turned into posters. Around the 1950s, while pinups were still very popular and helped people like Betty Page and Marilyn Monroe rise to fame, peep shows were becoming the best way to view video porn without getting slapped with jail time. Peep shows were often secret shows taking place in the back of book and record stores. They either featured real porn actresses or were simply a showing of a pornographic film. Yep, you could be shopping with your kid for the newest edition of Pippi Longstocking, and a few doors down that was going down. So, what a time. By this point, the underground porn director community was producing full-length porn films and selling tickets out of these bookstores. But during this entire time, porn was still extremely frowned upon and technically still illegal. So not only was it incredibly difficult to access this content, but it was incredibly expensive and risky. For that reason, as porn continued to evolve, it wasn't uncommon for photographers, filmmakers, or porn actresses themselves to take fetish-specific requests directly and have them sent directly to the consumer. However, this made porn consumers a lot bolder with what they were willing to request. Yeah, the real freaks came out with this one. But the problem was that direct requests were quite expensive. Man, if only there was a way to view pornography that wasn't so expensive and came right to me. Well, soon there was. Enter Hugh Hefner and his brainchild, Playboy. The first Playboy was published in 1953 and featured a stunning Marilyn Monroe on the cover. However, Playboy wasn't meant to be a porno mag at first. It actually started off as what Hefner called a manual for the urban man, featuring news and business advice as well as nude photos because why not? But it quickly became mostly nude photos because, well, sex sells, and Hefner saw it was selling magazines pretty well. A sad addition to this story is that Marilyn Monroe, the first Playboy cover model, didn't even want to be the cover model. Those photos were taken during a private pinup shoot she did while she was desperately poor under a pseudonym. However, when Marilyn finally made it big, Hefner was able to track down these photos, purchase them, and use them in Playboy without her consent. Big name girl meant big name sales, and he surely did not care about the damage this caused Monroe. However, despite being a porn magazine, Playboy was still quite tame compared to the things we see today. So, how did things get so extreme? Well, in capitalism, where there's money, there's competition, and there were plenty of businessmen gunning for Hefner's throne. Soon, Penthouse magazine came out in 1965, showing graphic nudity for the first time in any publication. And even they were quickly topped by Hustler magazine in 1979, who is now known as one of the most graphic pornographic publications of the late 1900s. By the 1970s, pornography had exploded and the era of stag films had died off, evolving into what is now known as X-rated theaters, which grew from 50 to almost 800 locations from the mid-1960s to 1971. The first feature-length film to make its way into the X-rated theaters was a movie titled Mona, the Virgin Nymph in 1970, and was quickly followed by an extremely graphic film in 1972 with an equally poetic name, Deep Throat. The significance of this second film was that its production quality was so high that it garnered a massive audience, being one of the first pornographic films in history to be talked about on the news. I find this film particularly significant because it was one of the first films to fall into the fantasy category of pornography. While none of the films up to this point are realistic, Deep Throat was one of the first films to show women's anatomy in a completely fantasy way. Long story short, the film was about a woman who had a vagina in her throat. How creative. This is where porn evolved from not only unrealistic body standard and expectations, to now creating fascination surrounding completely fictional characters and attributes. And porn directors quickly found out that this sold, and sold very well. Deep Throat was quickly viewed more than any other porn in history up to this point. Now, you may have thought there would have been backlash at this point, outrage from political and religious groups, and while there was, for the most part, people really liked their porn. And between 1965 and 1971, porn viewing became normalized. The shame of porn viewing was lost for a vast majority of the country, and going to X-rated theaters became cheap, easy, and accessible. Now you may think, awesome, sexual freedom, sexual revolution, how great. And that's how a lot of people felt. But I'd also like to note that the star of Deep Throat, Linda Lovelace, reported being sexually assaulted multiple times during the filming of Deep Throat. And while many say, well, this information came out years later, we couldn't have known. And that's fair. Linda Lovelace was pro-porn for many years after Deep Throat, and even advocated for sexual freedom on camera. But after coming forward in 1980 about the horrible physical and mental abuse she had at the hands of the director of Deep Throat, porn was already so ingrained in society that her film, as well as many others, continue to rake in tons of money, despite the abuse and assault during their production being public. So, why were millions of people so cool with watching content that had such a high likelihood of being abusive? Abuse has been a common theme of pornography since its initial days, but here we have the first time that abuse has been publicized on a national scale. And yet it seems that porn's ability to tap into our biological minds was able to overpower a lot of the country's moral judgment during that time. And it would have been lucky if it would have stopped there. A few porn actresses entered the industry, realized what was going on, and got out. But that was until porn became homemade. The VCR and the camcorder were invented during the 1980s, and now not only could you watch porn from home, you can make it yourself. And thus, amateur porn was born. This started out as home videos that people would watch privately in the comfort of their homes, but that all changed very quickly with the invention of the internet. Soon, it wasn't uncommon for VCR sex tapes to get stolen and posted online, and revenge porn quickly ran rampant. This was the days of Girls Gone Wild and the popularization of what I like to call like what you can't have style of porn, in which we romanticized celebrities and women that were pretty much unattainable to the average person. At this point, people were paying top dollar to see celebrities and super attractive women. And since this was the days before celebrities were selling this content themselves, a lot of celebrities and even normal people found themselves as porn actors and actresses without their consent. And since revenge porn laws didn't exist yet, there wasn't much they could do about it. This is why in the early 2000s, we saw a massive flood of celebrity sex scandals and leaked tapes, many of which had long-lasting and damaging effects. And some got rich and famous, but we'll say that that's the exception. And soon, unfortunately, there were plenty of places to post. The first website ever dedicated to porn is a pretty debatable topic, but most people give it to sex.com, created by Gary Kreeman, the founder of Match.com. You can see that he's a real romantic. But I want to tackle the sites that had a significant impact on the evolution of internet porn and really got us to where we are today, where we have unlimited access to porn, and it's free, accessible, and highly addictive. The year is 2002. University of Florida student Christopher Hinson gets the idea to start his own internet porn site, using the Girls Gone Wild model from the 90s, but with short films made for the internet instead. It wouldn't take long for Hinson to grab his camcorder and begin making these films and uploading it to his brand new website and business venture, bangbros.com. Within months, the website exploded and Hinson knew he had hit a gold mine. All he had to do was figure out how to monetize content that many advertisers didn't want to touch. Well, when you have that many viewers and no advertisers, why not advertise your own companies? And that's exactly what Hinson did. Hinson also founded what is considered one of the very first paid pornography sites, called Campster.com, in which viewers would pay live models to say their name and do different acts directly live through a screen. And he advertised this new venture on Bang Bros. At this point, Hinson has become the first of any porn director to create direct interaction between the actress and viewer through a screen. And people paid for the experience. They paid a lot for the experience. Campster and Bang Bros was making money hand over fist, almost uncontested, between 2002 and 2005. There simply wasn't any other porn directors that could match him for that time. That was until 2005. In Canada, two Concordia University graduates and competitive foosball players, Steven and Wysam, were creating TGPs, or thumbnail gallery posts, to show off their foosball event and skills. Little did they know that TGPs would eventually become synonymous with pornography, and they would soon grow one of the largest porn brands in history. While their websites started innocently enough, posting highlights from their tournaments and where to find them, this quickly took a turn when someone adopted their style of site to post porn, and quickly gained a ton of internet traffic. Inspired by this, Stefan and Wysam would recreate the site and dedicate it to pornography. They denoted this new business venture Brazzers, a play on the word brazen, which means to be bold without shame. The website went live in 2005 after the two friends garnered some investors out of Montreal. It took less than a year for Brazzers to become the most viewed porn site on the internet and in the top 10 websites visited, period, for that year. Brazzers soon got into the world of live cams and made so much money they began acquiring other porn sites, starting with the acquisition of mofos.com in 2008. As of 2022, Brazzers owns over 20 porn studios and hundreds of websites. According to siteworthtraffic.com, Brazzers rakes in about $200,000 per year per website. That means that Brazzers' network of studios makes over $4 million every single year selling porn. And yet, even that pales in comparison to the first site that allowed porn stars and amateurs to make money on their own terms without a studio. A site that would take the industry by storm in only a few short years. I am, of course, talking about the legendary website Pornhub.com. Founded by Matt Keiser in 2007, Pornhub was getting over 1 million daily views within his first year. Pornhub actually started as more of a pirating site, where videos from paid sites like Camster and Brazzers would be re-uploaded for free on Pornhub. At this time, people thought Pornhub was going to be a pretty short venture, with it about to get sued out of oblivion for pirating so much content. That was until 2010. When Fabian Thalmann bought both Pornhub and YouPorn and began hiring his own actors and actresses, as well as becoming one of the first porn site owners to use the marketing tactic search engine optimization to get organic web traffic to his site. For those who don't know, search engine optimization, or SEO, simply means creating content based on what people search on Google and tailoring what your website has to meet that demand. At this point, Pornhub was getting so much traffic that they began contracting porn studios to work with them instead of stealing from them. Soon, Brazzers and many other porn studios found a second home on Pornhub. By the time Thalmann gathered a handful of studios, Pornhub became the most searched porn site in history, housing more than 80% of all porn traffic as of 2012. However, in the 2010s, Pornhub became under fire for many different controversies, mostly including the site not monitoring revenge porn and not keeping underage people from accessing the content. At this point, there were thousands of complaints coming in of those who were stumbling across their own private photos and videos ending up on Pornhub due to things like hackers and angry ex-lovers. And at this time, in order to take down these videos, they needed to go through a lengthy repeal process through Pornhub. And to put it shortly, Pornhub caught a lot of flack for this. Around 2015, millions of photos were deleted from the site, and Pornhub was forced to create stricter guidelines for both amateur and professional creators. The tipping point was an event that happened around 2014, a little event known as the Fappening. This is where hackers illegally broke into celebrities' iCloud accounts and acquired nude photos and videos, leaking them to Pornhub as well as many other sites, causing many celebrities to get stalked, ridiculed, and sometimes even bullied offline. 2014 wasn't all bad though, as one of the most famous books on porn was written by Gary Wilson called Your Brain on Porn, which was a powder keg for starting one of the largest anti-porn movements we've seen on the internet in the last decade. NoFap, which is a group of men and women who advocate for abstaining from porn and immediate sexual gratification and actually looking for meaningful sexual relationships. Gary's thesis for the book was, quote, "Pornography possesses a significant threat to the emotional well-being of many of its users, and it would be irresponsible not to acknowledge that threat as real and pressing." Gary's book highlights the pressing and negative effects of porn and calls for more intensive studies to be done into its long-term effects. Gary cited numerous accredited studies linking porn use to things like reduced sexual gratification, reduced gray matter, lack of emotional response in relationships, and can even cause behavioral disorders like anxiety, depression, stress, and even social malfunctioning. Porn also was proven to hijack dopamine receptors and damage your brain's ability to respond to rewards. In essence, science has proved that porn addicts crave pornography in the same way that drug addicts crave drugs. They know it's bad, they know it's harming them, but they do it anyway, even if it makes them feel bad afterwards. It's that addictive. I'll link the extensive research done by both Gary Wilson and the research that I've done for this video in the description below, linking to things like depression, anxiety, and even change in sexual preference. However, it is important to note that the science here is limited. While I am making an argument, it is important to show both sides, and there is an argument that much of this is pseudoscience and based too heavily on human account rather than hard data. However, I'd like to see someone attempt to get more accurate data on porn use without constantly crossing pretty significant privacy boundaries. All to say, it's just not that easy. But I want to take a second and just have you look around. 100 years ago, porn barely existed, and today it dominates our society in a pretty significant way, where anyone that is even semi-attractive can make a six-figure salary selling porn. OnlyFans was launched in 2016 by Timothy Stokely, and by 2020 had already managed to rack up 174 million monthly visitors. For those who don't know, OnlyFans is a porn subscription service where sex workers can lock nude photos and videos behind a paywall that people can pay a subscription for of up to $5 to $50. OnlyFans takes 20% of these subscriptions, making them a billion-dollar company in less than a decade. Some of these models make well over $3 or $4 million a year, and even that pales in comparison to people like Bella Thorne, who are making upwards of $11 million per month. Yeah, per month. OnlyFans projected the normalization of porn onto the social media space, and the results are, quite frankly, disturbing. Such as when entire social media pages were dedicated to waiting for celebrities to reach legal age. Yeah, creepy. Or the amount of celebrities who've been stalked both virtually and in person, and the amount of people that have developed very creepy and disturbing parasocial relationships. For those who don't know, parasocial relationships are a one-sided relationship in which one side gives emotional effort and value, while the other side is completely unaware that the other person exists. There's currently not a deep enough understanding into the long-term effects of parasocial relationships, particularly as it relates to porn. It's one thing to love your favorite singer. It's another thing to fall in love with your favorite singer without them knowing who you are. This is turned up to 11 when you see the rise of AI technology such as deepfakes, where you can post anybody's face onto the face of a pornographic actress or actor. This technology is getting more realistic by the day and is only furthering the repercussions of both revenge porn and psychologically damaging parasocial relationships. That is why I hope there's going to be a slew of scientific evidence coming out in the next couple of years on both parasocial relationships and the effects of long-term porn use. I hope there will be studies coming out that will give us a better understanding of how these virtual relationships with porn actors and actresses are going to affect the younger generation's ability to form healthy sexual relationships, and hopefully will come with some legislation regulating the use of deepfake technology. With the rise of AI and on-demand porn, we are seeing a rise in people not just paying for nudes, but paying for dates, virtual partners, having actresses say their names, mailing clothing and bodily fluids to people's houses, and making products with those fluids. Things are getting really weird. Unfortunately, while I see things going in the right direction in some respects, I see things getting worse in many others. I mean, OnlyFans now sponsors global sporting events. When in human history besides today have we seen sex work advertised on the national scale like this? While I am not against sex work on the surface, I have an understanding that allowing it to grow at this level will have lasting repercussions. And we're already seeing it. The young person virginity rate, especially amongst men, has tripled since 2008, from 9% to 27%. And I fear that will reach a point where young people might be searching out porn more than they are searching for real sexual relationships. And while the war between genders has always been present in history, the watering down of sex as a commodity, more so than a loving act between two people, has devalued relationships in a lot of senses. I think it is unwise to deny that sex plays an important role in how we feel about our partner, and also plays an important role on the success of marriages. We are already seeing the rise in red pill content, openly misogynistic and hateful messaging, and content demonizing women as a whole, as well as equally as extreme counter-arguments that are advocating for full open sexual promiscuity and even the sexualization of children. You can see now that the balance is shifting from simple enjoyment of pornography in private to it reaching the level of national debate. It is getting extreme, and it is getting dangerous. In 100 short years, we've gone from simply writing about the normal act of sex to paying strangers for obscure and strange acts to satisfy a continuously warping sense of sexuality. I fear if we continue on this path, our views of attractiveness and sex will continue to warp until polyamory rises to become the norm in order to satisfy a frankly insatiable sexual appetite fueled by indulgence in fantasy and unrealistic pornography. Porn can exist in a regulated and controlled environment where those who wish to seek it can do so with reasonable hurdles to safeguard those who don't wish to. Social media platforms should have algorithms to make it much easier to block this content. And there should be spaces on the internet where kids can go without parents worrying that they're going to be stumbling across this content. Again, sexuality is great, and porn is not inherently bad, if well regulated. But there is a time, place, and moderation for it that needs to be followed for the betterment of society as a whole. We've tolerated an industry with a century-long history of abuse, sexual misconduct, revenge, and objectification, diluting the societal value regarding sex and relationships. I am again no saint, but I urge those to think about the society they want to create and live in. For me, I didn't learn how damaging this stuff was until I realized that I only sought this stuff out when I was at my lowest, and only stopped seeking it when I felt I was loved and cared about. We can strive for a world where we see sex as a commodity, where pain is quelled through easy gratification. Or we can strive for a world where we're seeking real, genuine relationships, where sex is about bonding, not business. The choice is yours.